Thank you, John. So this is a presentation that, thanks to Olga, I made to the American National Cattlewomen, Inc., their conference for the 7th and 2nd districts, which includes Minnesota. I made a couple of weeks ago on a Saturday morning, and I called it "Oh Damn" just for this group, but called it for them "The Mighty Mississippi: How Midwestern Agricultural Depends Upon It." And we see airplanes go ahead, we see overhead, we see airplanes, we see cars go by and trucks go by. We say ooh and ah, at least I say ooh and ah every time a train goes by, but we oftentimes ignore barges when they go by. First of all, you can't get very close to them, number one. And number two is they're just a whole bunch of off in the distance. What are they carrying? Who cares? It's not part of my life. The reason that I think that Olga asked me to participate in this is because I did once upon a time live on a farm, Säbygård i Sjöstad, Småland in Sweden. At the time, I thought that we were a pretty big operation because we had 75 dairy cow, 50 beef cow or cattle, 4 horses, 2 work horses, 2 riding horses, a flock of ponies, more gall darn rabbits you can shake a stick at, which we ate, and sheep. And but that was, according to these women, a very small operation. By the way, I'll tell you that these women are the nicest, kindest, sweetest people you can ever meet. They all have sensible shoes and sensible haircuts. They You would meet, if you were meet them in a bar someplace, you say, oh, that's a nice middle-aged woman, and maybe I should buy her a drink because she but anyway, being a gentleman, I'll buy her a drink. And turns out that these people, for the most part, they're doing pretty well. One woman is speaking to she's about to take her 9th Viking cruise. She's done 8 in Europe. Now she wants to do one in the Mississippi. And as you all know, Viking cruises are not necessarily free. And they do a lot of traveling, these people do. But at the same time, they work their tuckuses off during season. I did ask them, they are cattlewomen and they are not ranchers. We tend to distinguish a ranch being beef cattle and a farm being row crops and dairy cattle. Almost everybody in the room did a little bit of everything. The reason that Olga thought I was qualified to give this presentation was because I've traveled all the Great River Road from the Missouri border north up to the Lake Itasca. If you've not driven the Great River Road, it's really worth your effort and time. I wish the map on the right was a little bit better, but the Great River Road was actually started in 1934. The plan was to go from Canada to the Gulf, but it actually goes just Itasca, Lake Itasca, northern Minnesota, to the Gulf. And it is the closest paved road to the Mississippi the entire distance, but it never goes on a freeway. And you really get to know the states when you take the Great River Road, what the states are like, what the people are like, what the towns are like. Pretty darn interesting. For example, I never knew that people in Iowa, they don't have cabins because they don't go up north in Iowa. What's northern Iowa? Corn. But a lot of people go east and they have these houses or barges or somethings on the Mississippi, and just tons and tons of cabins along the Mississippi, what we call cabins in Minnesota, for their summer pleasure. Good for them. The Great River Road in Iowa and Illinois is really important to their tourism. In Minnesota, it's kind of important, but we don't make enough of it. By the way, look at this sign in front of you of the steering wheel for a stern wheeler. This is Great River Road. I think hundreds and thousands of people have driven by those signs all their life and have no idea what it really means. The Mississippi River watershed, as you can see, is huge, huge. It goes way all the way to the east to, to the west to Idaho. Actually, some of Saskatchewan and Alberta is drained to the Mississippi, and it goes all the way to the east to Pittsburgh and farther. All this drains into the Mississippi River, which then ends up in the Gulf of Mexico at roughly New Orleans. You would think the Mississippi, and oh, by the way, in my talk does not go into Missouri. The Missouri River is a little bit different. It's shallower, and I don't know how far you can go on the Missouri River. I don't know much about it, but I do know about the Mississippi. The Mississippi, into the Mississippi drains the Missouri River, the Ohio River, and many, many more rivers, as you can see here. By the way, if you look at the very north of Minnesota, Minnesota, I believe, is the only state in the Union that has 3 watersheds, one into Lake Superior and then on to the Atlantic via the St. Lawrence Seaway, one north via the the Red River of the North up to the Arctic Circle, up to Hudson Bay, and finally into the Gulf of Mexico. That's what we're talking about. The steamboat era started in 1840 and lasted until 1916. 1840s, frankly, when motorboats, motors or steam motors, or steam engines were invented and were put on boats. The advantage of a steamboat like this, again, I wish the photo was better. The advantage of a steamboat is that it is very shallow drafted. Be it a stern wheeler or be it a side wheeler, you can pretty much get away with a 2, 3, 4 foot draft on the boat. So you can go pretty darn far. The problem is there are rapids, 2 sets of rapids in Iowa that steamboats cannot go past. So if you want to have grain from Minnesota or any other product from Minnesota and send it, for example, into Pittsburgh via steamboat, you had to go down if you want to go down the Mississippi to Rock Island along the Mississippi, which is in Illinois on the east side and in Iowa on the west side, you have to unload the boat and carry it by cattle boat or cart or something further on south, and then reload another boat at the other end of the rapids. So the 2 rapids in Iowa make it very difficult for steamboats to be really that effective. I learned, by the way, that a steamboat from St. Paul to Mankato is 9 to 19 hours. That's pretty interesting. The locks and dams, as you can see here, again, I wish the photo was better. Locks and dams that you see are maintained by our Corps of Engineers. Now, they have several tasks assigned to them, but for this purpose, they are to maintain a navigation channel. It keeps getting deeper, by congressional fiat, keeps getting deeper and deeper. And it's maintained by the Army Corps of Engineers via a system of locks and dams. None of the locks and dams on the Mississippi have anything to do with floodwaters. Now, while the Army Corps of Engineers does other things, build levees, for example, for floodwaters, those have nothing to do with the maintaining the navigation channel on the Mississippi. The important part for us is the Port of New Orleans. The navigation channel now on the Mississippi River down to Baton Rouge is 9 feet, but the navigation channel from Baton Rouge south is 45 feet and is about to be deepened to 50 feet. A 50-foot channel means that a boat that can go across the Panama Canal can go as far north as Baton Rouge. And so that means that saltwater vessels can take a whole lot of Minnesota grain away, a lot of Minnesota agricultural products, and ship it abroad. Over 500 million tons per year go down the Mississippi River. This makes it the largest segment of maritime industry. That means to say that it is larger than even outgoing export. Of domestic maritime industry. 60% of exported U.S. grain goes down the Mississippi to either Baton Rouge or New Orleans, loaded onto salties and exported from there. That's a whole lot of stuff. Now, this photo happens to be Lake Pepin, where my parents used to live, and you can see how small these barges look, and yet that is a collection, I believe, of 8 barges. A lot of stuff. Along the Mississippi also goes 244 tons of petroleum products, and shipping along the Mississippi River is greater than all the ocean going and the Great Lakes shipping combined. Think about that. More stuff goes down the Mississippi than all American ocean and Great Lakes shipping combined. That's a lot of stuff. And we're talking about all sorts of stuff, not just agricultural products. Out of Duluth, yes, we send a whole lot of grain out of Duluth, Superior, but their big export product up there is taconite. Commodity shipped on the upper Mississippi, that is north of St. Louis, 42 million tons are shipped on that, 23 million tons of coal, 15 million tons of crude material. That can be anything from scrap metal to if you want to ship the shells of grain, that can be put in dog food and stuff like that. 10 million tons of chemicals and 8 million tons of petroleum. There are certain barges that are made to carry nothing but liquid petroleum. They go up and down the Mississippi, or they go down up the they go up the Mississippi to refine. I put this in. This is in Red Wing, Minnesota. Olga asked me to do this presentation prior to, I mean, recently, and I did. And had I known about it last summer, I would have taken much more photos on the Mississippi. Can you all see my cursor? I'm going to pretend you can.
Yes.
How about,
Yes,
yes, okay. Notice that this barge here is very low in the water at the end near us, but very high in the water over there. They're loading that barge. So the barge comes empty. This is Red Wing, as I said. Those are the elevators in Red Wing. I've been here in Red Wing in the summer when the trucks lined up to empty into these elevators. There must be 50 trucks waiting to unload. And they unload here in these streets in front of us, and there's a waiting area up above, a staging area up above, tons and tons of trucks. What you can't see is there are more elevators to the left on the other side of the road. And they spend 24/7 doing nothing but loading barges and sending it downstream. And these are tons and tons of barges filled with soybean, corn, other commodity products that we have in Minnesota. From Minnesota, we send, and this the most recent numbers I could find were actually 2010, $7 billion worth of grain, agricultural products go south from Minnesota on the Mississippi. We are the fourth largest exporter in the United States. And by the way, $7 billion of Minnesota products are exported. Doesn't talk about what happens in the United States. Only 33% of our production is exported. That is to say, 66% is used domestically. So that $7.1 billion represents only 33% of our product. We send our product to Asia and Oceania, that is to say, through the Suez Canal, 45%, and we send 38% to the Americas. We send relatively little to Africa, to the Middle East, Europe, and of course, very little to Russia because they produce so much there. Capacity comparison, one 15 barge tow set equals 216 rail cars pulled by 6 locomotives. Clearly, if you fill up 15 barges and have one towboat with it, you're really doing an efficient way of shipping. By the way, shipping by on the Mississippi of ton per fuel mile is just incredibly cheaper than anything else. The trucks are very expensive. Rail is relatively medium, I would say, but barge is relatively cheap, especially to go downstream, because the downstream carries you. The barges, like you see in front of you, will carry grain, be it soybean or corn or whatever, south, and then actually the same barge will be cleaned and come upstream with a fertilizer and other chemicals, salt, for example, for our highways, and then cleaned and then sent back south again. The barge set you see in front of you would equal 1,050 trucks on the highway. Can you imagine having 1,050 more trucks on the highway going south? Pretty amazing. If you've ever looked, by the way, at railroads in America, most railroads go east-west. Relatively few railroads go north-south. There's a history on that. The government subsidized Western expansion, so therefore the United States government subsidized railroads going west. That began with Lincoln and went on from him. The only railroad not to have ever taken subsidy money from the U.S. government was the Great Northern, whose T-shirt I have on right now. You may want to look at it when we come back. James J. Hill, who built the Great Northern, said, I want to go to Seattle and to the Far East as quickly as possible. Heck with the U.S. government. Anyway, that set in front of you replaces 1,050 trucks. Sets like this that you see in front of you go through Minnesota probably 10 a day, or maybe 20 a day, depends on the season. We are limited in Minnesota on when the ice breaks, and the ice is actually the ice on Lake Pepin that counts. The Corps of Engineers considers the season open when Lake Pepin opens up, which is generally the last place to be open. That's because there isn't a current, so to speak, on Lake Pepin. There's current everywhere else. The current breaks up the ice earlier. So they send a barge, several barges, and a towboat through Lake Pepin in the spring. The barges are loaded with sand because there's a good chance they could sink, and they want to make sure they go to the bottom, and they want to make sure they have a relatively recent valueless product, and they use those barges on the Mississippi and Lake Pepin to be icebreakers. Midwest agriculture thrives on bulk commodity traffic on the Mississippi. And here you can see a lock and dam. The dam here just dams the water back up behind it and raises the water level so that they have a 9-foot commercial shipping channel. The locks on the left side you see over here, oops, go back. Over here, there are the locks. All locks function by gravity. There's no water being pumped. The only mechanics are opening and closing the doors to the lock. Some locks are relatively shallow, maybe 6 feet, 7 feet, whatever. The locks at St. Anthony, which are permanently closed now, that was a drop of 55 feet. And then you take the lower St. Anthony locks, which the public often doesn't even see or know that it's there. That's another 20 feet. So in total, the locks and dams at St. Anthony are 75 feet, which is half the drop, I think, no, 1/4 of the drop of the Mississippi along its entire distance. Once you hit St. Louis, there are no more locks and dams south of there. The river's big enough and the channel's deep enough. They don't have to, they can dredge it, but they don't have to dam it. So it's getting down to St. Louis is the question. And by the way, I think there are 26 locks and dams from here to St. Louis. And that would be the end. How about that? Now we can have questions.
Thanks, Greg. Hey, while you're on that last slide, if you can reshare it.
Yes, sir.
I had a question about the length of the barges and the length of, I mean, it probably makes sense, but I just want to hear you state it as well. But the length of a barge is limited to the length of the shortest lock and dam if you're traveling that distance, correct? They're kind of like the Panama Canal. They're built to a certain dimension. Is that standardized in any way? Or
yeah, well, it's true. But the shortest lock that I'm aware of is at St. Anthony, and that is 2 barges long. Mm-hmm. The farther south can you all see that, by the way, the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. The farther south you go, the longer the locks become, both because the terrain is more gentle, and so they can build a longer lock, mm-hmm. and also because the barge sets are much larger when you go south. You got to see these guys aim these things into the barge, into the locks. It's unbelievable. You take we call them a towboat. They're really a push boat, and you can have 8 barges in a set, and then the push boat makes the 9th position. And so it's very long and relatively narrow. These guys, they will thread that into a lock, and there will be 1 foot on either side. Unbelievable. And at 20 miles an hour on turbid water. How they do it, I do not know, but these guys are incredible. The barges, they run 24/7, i.e. they have 2 captains, so to speak. One works 12 hours now, and another one works the next 12 hours. They don't want to stop at all. You have small towboats that put the barge sets together, and then once the set is created, then a big, and I mean a big, these are really big, powerful towboats, comes in, wires itself or ties itself into the barge set, and off they go, going south. The many barge sets have to break into pieces to go through the locks, and then they reassemble at the other end of the lock, be they going north or going south. But once you get south, once you get south of about Missouri border, the locks get pretty big and pretty wide. Pretty amazing.
So thanks for addressing that. So you can break the barges up into pieces, ship them through the lock and dam, anchor them or something, reassemble, and continue on your way. Is that standard?
And I'm going to correct you just one little bit. You can break the barge setup. You can't break the barge up.
Well, thank you.
The setup means there's connecting pieces to the barge. What does that mean?
Sure. So south of New Orleans, south of St. Louis, the barge set will tend to be 15 barges. That is to say, 5 wide and 3 deep. Oh. And the 4 wide and 4 deep, and then the 16th position tied in is the towboat or the push boat.
Mm.
And those things are huge. Those are just huge.
Mhm.
You know, the barges are standard length. They're all the same length. They're all the same width. I would say I'm not good at making an analogy, but they have got to be 2 to 3 football fields long and probably 1 football field wide. These things are huge. They look kind of small to us because we're usually on the shore looking at them, but you get close to these things, they're really, really big.
Mhm.
Um, some of them have square fronts, and so you put those in the middle of the barge set, and some have a diagonal front, and so that you can push the water side, and those are put at the front of the set. But of course, the ones that are square can hold more commodity. The guys who live in the barges, let me tell you, those are river rats. They work their tuckuses off. They are forever, every time they come to a lock, they have to break up the barge set, tie some off to the shoreline or wherever they tie them off, send some of them through the lock, and then the push boat or the towboat comes back up, grab some more barges, and etc. So it can take them 3, 4, 5 passes through the locks to get all the barges back together down to the same set. And some some locks are relatively near to each other, and some are quite a distance. For example, there's a lock and dam at Hastings in Minnesota, and the next lock and dam set is almost just north of Winona. So they have a long ways to go. All the locks and dams have viewing platforms open to the public. Some of them are really, really close. I mean, you are literally a foot or two away from the barge when the barge comes into the lock. The Corps of Engineers really wants us, the public, to believe in this and what they're doing and to understand what they're doing. I think the Corps of Engineers gets a whole lot of criticism for all sorts of things. You know, well, that dam is there. Why did my farm flood? Well, the dam has nothing to do with your flooding farm. The dams are strictly there for agriculture or for commercial traffic on the Mississippi, and they don't have anything to do with flooding or non-flooding. If you have trouble on your farm or your town flooding, that might be the Corps of Engineers, but it's not the lock and dam system. That's the levee system, which is a whole nother department. For those of you who you probably know, some of you who live here in the Twin Cities, St. Paul right now is being flooded. So the area around Water Street, area near the airport, the home and field in St. Paul is actually designed to be flooded. If you notice, St. Paul has lots of levees down there. Home and field is surrounded by levees. The great, huge iron gates that close off that make sure that the airport can stay open. But the area of St. Paul that is currently flooded is meant to be flooded. And they know it's going to flood, and they just say close, and the levees are on the other side of what is flooded, and that just happens every 3, 4, 5 years. Those of you who are in the Twin Cities, you might want to drive right now West River Road near the University of Minnesota, and there's a little area called Bohemia Flats down there. The river is very, very high and is up to the concrete barriers there. It's probably only 3 feet below where you are walking, where normally it's probably 10, 15 feet below where you're walking. Other questions?
Me.
By the way, I can't see you. I can only see the picture.
Okay. Questions. One is, where do barges actually start? How far north on the Mississippi would a barge start? And then if a barge just started and didn't have to really stop, but it went through all the locks and dams, how long does it take to get all the way to the bottom?
So I can tell you that a drop of water dropped into Lake Itasca at the headwaters takes 90 days to flow to the Gulf of Mexico. And I think talking about the water of the barge is probably more accurate or better way of thinking about it. You want to think about why the Twin Cities are where they are. And by the way, I didn't know this until I doing this research. I did not know the Twin Cities are the largest metropolitan area on the Mississippi. We're bigger than New Orleans. We're bigger than St. Louis. I did not know that. That's new news to me. The farthest north on the Mississippi River that you can take a stern wheeler or a side wheeler paddle boat north and have a natural slope that going up to the top of the gorge is St. Paul. And that's why St. Paul is where it is. And so you could take a ton of but you don't want to export timber to Minnesota, but let's call it fabric or something produced in the Far East, pajamas or whatever you want to call. In 1850, right? It's called after the war, 1865. You put it on a steamboat in Pittsburgh. That steamboat could go all the way down via the canals because they had rapids on the Ohio River also. So they built canals parallel to the river. We don't have any of those in Minnesota for reasons I can go into if you want to, but they went south, and then New Orleans, at St. Louis, they take a hard right and go up the Mississippi. You had those rapids in Iowa that I talked about at Rock Island, went around those rapids, reloaded on a new stern wheeler, and the farthest north you could go and have a natural incline that a horse pulling a wagon or an ox pulling a wagon could go up to the top of the slope was in St. Paul. Ergo, we have St. Paul. And St. Paul had two landings, this upper landing and the lower landing. Lower landing fed into what the Phalen Creek Gorge. Ergo, that's why you have Sweet Hollow where it was, wherever it was. And the upper landing was where one has not Elliott Park, but Fort Paws with the restaurant there. And that was a graduation up. You could go that way. Now, remember that St. Paul was in the Louisiana Purchase, so the white settlers were allowed on that side of the river as early, I believe, as 1836, whereby the Minneapolis side was the Louisiana Purchase, and white settlers were not allowed into the Minneapolis area until 1853. So you had to think about, gosh, how are you going to settle this great, vast prairie west of Minneapolis if there is no incline in Minneapolis to go up? Well, of course, they went up the Minnesota River into places like Carver and Chanhassen. And there you could reach with a stern wheeler, and there was a gradual incline up the side of the gorge, especially to the north, well, to both sides, north and south. And that became, that's how the settlement came. Sometimes, especially in the spring, you could take a stern wheeler all the way from Minnesota, from St. Paul, all the way from St. Paul, Fort Snelling, and on to Mankato. Even sometimes you go even farther to Mankato and go to Redwood Falls. But boy, you really had to have a high water spring. And it was not uncommon in those days on a stern wheeler to ask everyone to get off the boat and push, because they got caught up in a wing dam or something, and they had to make the boat lighter, and you couldn't take the goods off of it. So they got the people off the boat, and they literally rode up their pants to their ankles or whatever and pushed the boat to get the boat to go farther north. Of course, nowadays, the farthest commercial traffic on the Minnesota-Mississippi waterway is the port of Shakopee, John. And beyond that, the Corps of Engineers does not guarantee anything. Because the lock and dam at St. Anthony are closed, you cannot have commercial traffic there. The lock and dam number 1 underneath the Ford Bridge, or just below the Ford Bridge, I should say, is still being run. Lock and dam number 1 and St. Anthony Falls, both of those locks and dams there, the Corps of Engineers wants to be rid of them. They don't have any commercial traffic. They don't have the lock and dam number at St. Anthony Falls is closed permanently. The Corps of Engineers really wants to get rid of that. The question is, who's going to buy it? Who are they going to give it to? The park board doesn't want it because it costs way too much to maintain that lock and dam. The National Park Service would love to take over the park, love to take over that territory, but they don't want to maintain the lock and dam. What are they going to do with that? They just don't know. Lock and dam at St. Anthony were put in my father's opinion, and frankly, I think my dad was right, as a boondoggle in the early 1960s as an employment method. They had, there are a lot of people unemployed in the Twin Cities. That, as you can tell, looking down from the Stone Arch Bridge, is a huge, huge undertaking to build that locks down below. The dam was there. I'm sorry, the waterfall was there, but they had to put in the locks. And at a drop of 55 feet, that's a lot of concrete. A lot of concrete went into that thing. Now, my dad would say, and my dad's Republican, the Democrats did a sneaky thing. The sand for for Falls St. Anthony comes from Gray Cloud Island, which is just south of St. Paul. The sand pits there were owned by the Sheely Concrete Company. The Sheely Concrete Company located their concrete mixing division in North Minneapolis along the Mississippi. So they had to ship the sand from Gray Cloud Island to North Minneapolis. Gosh, that means a whole bunch of trucks on the highway. How to resolve that issue? Oh, let's put in a lock at St. Anthony. And who do you think got the contract to build the locks? Sheely Company. So Sheely Company created the need themselves and then got the contract to build it. And if you look down, I mean, don't you wish in hindsight that the Stone Ash Bridge was continuous and there was no lock below, and you could have the true honest feeling of the Stone Arch Bridge and have this dam going all the way across and not have the 1960s lock there? Yes, I think it'd be great. If you want to pay the billions of dollars to remove the lock, I'll tell you how to do it. And anyway, I've spoken to rangers, by the way, U.S. National Park Service rangers. They, as you probably know, the National Park Service has a national scenic and recreational waterway from Hastings to Coon Rapids. Some people try to insist to me that that's a national park. That is not a national park. It's a scenic and recreational waterway. That is maintained by the National Park Service. They would love to have that area right near the Lock and Dam at St. Anthony as their headquarters, but the Minneapolis Park Board would not cede that territory to them. So therefore, they have their headquarters in the Science Museum in St. Paul.
Greg, why don't they turn the lock and dams into, hydro generation? The water's coming through, it's built.
They tried, John. They really tried. First of all, this is not a picture of Lock and Dam at St. Anthony, but if it were, on the right-hand side, there's a generating plant, generating plant that's been there since, I believe, 1880. We had electricity in Minneapolis before they had electricity in Washington, D.C. Think about that. There was electricity in Minneapolis in the office buildings before there was electricity in the White House. That's something to think about. And it's because of the electric generator at the Lock and Dam, at the dam at St. Anthony. And by the way, and the millers, the people who did the milling, not the team, the millers realized that they didn't need water if they could harness the river for electricity. So they shifted from water wheels that drove millstones or grist mills to water that drove electricity, and then they took the electricity and used that to grind the flour. On the left side, on the west bank, they wanted to put in another useful generator. It would be very, very little above ground, be almost entirely below ground, but it would create a low humming sound, a small vibration. How loud it would be, I don't know. How gentle would it be, I don't know. The people behind it swore it was a very small, quiet hum. The neighbors who lived along the river there, in all those buildings, the condo buildings that have now grown up everywhere from the Churchill north to what's to do in the 7 in the south, they fought it completely and they won. They and the park board wanted to put in a generator, and the residents said no water generation here. If no one wants to take over the Ford Dam, which is again below the Highland Bridge, the Corps of Engineers wants to take the entire dam out, everything, because nobody wants to maintain it. On the east side of that dam was an electric generating plant that serviced the entire Ford plant. So think about that. We had that huge Ford plant right there in Highland that took no electricity off the grid. Well, of course, the Ford plant is gone. They now produce, I don't know what percentage, I'm going to make it up and say 25% of St. Paul's need for electricity at the dam. The problem is that the electric company, it's a subsidiary of XL, will maintain the generating plant, but will not maintain the dam. Up in Kurt's part of the world, I don't think Kurt's on the call anymore, but in Kurt's part of the world, Excel maintains both the dam and the electric generating plant. But in St. Paul, they only maintain the electric generating plant, but they want somebody else to maintain the dam. Corps of Engineers says, hey, the only commercial traffic that comes through here are those 2 paddle boats that are docked in Bohemian Flats. They carry nothing but tourists. They do 1 or 2 trips a day, maybe 3 on during the high summer. Do we really have to spend millions and millions of dollars to maintain this dam so they can, for free, go through the lock and dams? Corps of Engineers would say, no, we don't want this anymore. But again, they can't find a buyer or somebody else to take over the project for them. So the Corps of Engineers has 3 dams they want to get rid of. Lock and Dam number 1 at Highland, and the 2 locks and dams at St. Anthony.
If number 1 went away in Highland, that's a huge drop. What would happen to the water level of the Mississippi?
Well, former Mayor R.T. Rybeck says, wouldn't that be great if we got rid of the dam? We would have world-class kayaking on the Mississippi River between downtown Minneapolis and Highland Park. And that's exactly what we'd have, truly world-class kayaking. And that would become a wonderful kayaking run. University of Minnesota just spent $13 million building a boathouse below Kaufman Union for the scullers who use that water. And they scull from the Ford Dam up to the University of Minnesota, or up to the Lock and Dam St. Anthony Dam number 2. So the University of Minnesota does not want them to get rid of the Ford Dam. R.T. Rybeck does want them to get rid of it. I'm sure, what do you call it? Kayaking enthusiasts do want it to be gone, and boating enthusiasts don't want it to be gone. Fishing, supposedly, along that stretch, if the dam was gone, would be remarkable. The problem, of course, is you have to have a very flat bottom, shallow fishing boat to go up there. By the way, there is another dam between St. Anthony Dam and Ford Dam that was built in the 1880s and is now submerged. So you have to be very careful when you boat up there that you don't hit the other dam.
Huh, who knew? You did.
I must have known, because I just told you. If on very, very low water times, if we really have a drought, for example, last August, you could see just the very top of that dam.
Where does it come across?
A little bit upstream from Town and Country Club. And there's a historical marker on the St. Paul side telling you where it is. Other questions, other comments?
Greg, fascinating. Several years back, we took the boat, a boat that Mark has from his family, and we went up and down the Mississippi, and we went through a couple of the locks.
Yes.
It's incredible, isn't it? I'll never forget the experience.
Yeah.
We went down, and then we went back up, and they were as nice as they could be. The Corps of Engineers, come on in, there was no waiting, essentially. I think we were in it alone sometimes. And I think it was another time it was a canoe with a couple of paddlers. And it was just, there we were. They just stopped everything. It was such it was quite the privilege to.
It really is a privilege
it was incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really quite a privilege to set sail on the Mississippi. I'm sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah. Greg, I was curious though, the barges, once they get to New Orleans, do they just keep going to?
No. So now I'm going to be a little pedantic, and you can tell me I'm being too much of a teacher. Lots of people point to farms, say, oh, look at the elevator. That's really not an elevator, that's a silo. So you got to be very distinctive between elevators and silos. Nowadays, in the 2000 aughts and the early 2010s, you saw all these blue harvest door elevators going up on farms. You see those things? If you recognize them, I used to say to myself, oh, that's a wealthy farm. They have 3 harvest doors there. And those were very distinctive, very branded, very blue. You could really tell they're harvest door, and a great thing. And then they discovered that the harvest door elevators were prone to mold. And once you have mold on your grain is worthless. So nowadays, you don't see hardly any harvest stores left anymore, or they've been abandoned. And you see these great big grain bins, often built by a company called, I think, Koch. Anyway, they're huge galvanized steel grain bins. They tend to be more fat than they are high. And if you see a farmer with a lot of grain bins like that, and there's frequently elevators, sectioned of items to move the grain around above them, that's a pretty darn good, successful farmer. Nowadays, the farmer holds the grain on his or her land, his or her property, until they feel the commodity price has reached a price that they are satisfied with, and they lickety split, take the grain from their farm via a truck to the nearest elevator. And the elevator is that concrete thing you see on the side of the railroad or the side of the river. That picture. And I see if I can do, yeah, there's an elevator right there. And those elevators hopefully only hold the grain that they're shipping for a day or two, not for months, for a day or two. And the truck comes in, it dumps it down into a hole in the ground. They take a quality control of the truck of the grain in the truck before it dumps. And these conveyor belts move the grain into those elevators, and they fill those elevators up. Or hopefully not, they don't fill them up, but take the grain, and from the elevators, those concrete things in front of you, the grain dumps down again, is taken by conveyor, and that's that yellow thing you see here, right there. And they dump it in a barge and they ship it off as fast as they possibly can. Or, and you can't tell, but because of the picture, but over here where my cursor is on the left, they would, same devices would take it that way and put it into grain cars. But they want to get out of there as fast as possible. And because, grain sitting in an elevator makes you no money. Grain on a ship moving someplace, that's where the money is. So the barges make it to New Orleans. They have elevators like this, much, much, much bigger than these here. Take the grain out of the barges, nowadays via suction. And the guys literally go down the big suction hose and suck everything out of the barge, goes to the elevator, and then from the elevator, it's then by much bigger things than this little yellow thing here is put into an ocean-going ship. And an ocean-going ship, I forget, I had it someplace on one of the slides. I think an ocean-going ship can take somewhere around 20,000 barges worth of grain to Asia or to wherever it's going. It's just amazing how much we ship.
We're right at time here. So let me
I'm going to stop share and you take over for the three-way test. Four-way test, sorry.
John, we can't hear you.
So sorry there. How about that?
Now we can hear you.
I think when I shared my thing went on mute. Okay, the rotary four-way test of the things we think, say, and do. Is it the truth?
Is it fair to all concerned? Would it build goodwill and better friendships? Would it be beneficial to all concerned?
And with that, thank you for a wonderful presentation, Greg. You never disappoint. You're so knowledgeable.
Thank you all.
You're
Thank you all.
You're a treat to listen to.
So good.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, everyone have a great evening.
Thanks. Bye, John.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
Everyone.